Well, these are difficult times. We're probably getting tired of hearing people say that too, but it is a difficult time. We are struggling, and we are struggling in part with having to be isolated as much as we possibly can, with not being able to connect with each other in all of the ways that we've always felt were so important to us. The ways that help us feel like we're comfortable and at home, right? All of the really important ways, like NBA basketball and Oilers hockey games, or if you're really desperate, Calgary Flames hockey games. But curling, hockey, going to dances, going to restaurants, and all of those ways in which we gather together as people that help us feel connected. The things that are so important to us. And suddenly, we're having to find other ways to stay connected. We're having to find other ways to feel at home with ourselves. Well, ironically, we're at home with ourselves. It can feel a little bit like we're lost, right? We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know where we're going. We don't know how long this is going to last. It's a wilderness, is what it is, of not knowing, of the unexpected. You know, a few weeks back, I thought I had this great idea for Lent, because during Lent, though we usually use a common lectionary, I thought it would be a great idea to explore the wilderness and to explore it in different ways. Not just the way that we traditionally do with Jesus, right? Jesus intentionally, with the power of the Holy Spirit, goes into the wilderness. He intentionally goes there, where there is temptation, there is discovery, there's all sorts of things that happen there. But then he comes out of the wilderness and goes into his ministry. It's a learning experience for Jesus, I think. I think it's the point at which he learns how to be himself and how he's going to share that with others. The point is he goes there on purpose. And lots of people want to have wilderness experiences in order to do that. Backpacking in Europe, to find yourself, all those kind of things. Vision quests. Experiences where we intentionally find ourselves in the wilderness as a means of discovery. But, and I didn't know this was going to be so present when I thought about doing this, here we are in a moment where we can feel like we're in a wilderness because we're lost. We didn't mean to be here. We don't want to be here. We don't know how to get out of here. We don't know when we're going to be able to get out of here. We're just kind of lost. And we need to figure out a way to be okay with that until we can find our way out. And here we are with Moses today. So when I think of Moses, just take a second and imagine, envision in your mind what Moses looks like. Charlton Heston. You thought Charlton Heston right away. If you're somebody who's seen the Ten Commandments, you immediately thought of Charlton Heston. And in my head, I didn't just think of Charlton Heston. I'm thinking that moment in the Ten Commandments where he's coming down Sinai the first time with the tablets, right? And he's discovered they've all gone nuts down there. And he's got the tablets in one hand and he's got the finger pointing and it's like, woe to you, that moment. And you can see behind him in the frame, you can see God is present in the fire in the cloud on the mountain, right? So it's a big moment. He's powerful, he's strong, God is there. That's the Moses we remember. We remember the Moses who led the people in the wilderness. The people who provided for them, even though it's actually God who was doing that. The people who provided for them. The people who led, the people he led to the promised land. The great leader, the prophet, the lawgiver. That's the Moses we imagine. Even in the story of Moses meeting God in the burning bush, Moses isn't afraid. He's reluctant, but he's not afraid. He's talking to God through a bush that burns but is not consumed by the fire. And he's not afraid. and he looks like Charlton Heston. And the thing is, even if we also know the story of Moses as a baby being placed in the basket on the Nile, and the Pharaoh's daughter finds him, that's great. It's a cute baby story. Awesome. We invariably skip over everything that happens between then and the burning bush. And some of that is the reading from this morning. That's a very different Moses. Whether Moses always knew he was Hebrew, even though he was living in the Egyptian palace, whether he knew or not, whether he found out accidentally, whether somebody told him, however he discovered it, he's a Hebrew baby who grows up in the palace of the Egyptian Pharaoh. Even later, when he meets the women at the well in Midian, they describe him to their father as an Egyptian. He grows up as an Egyptian in the Egyptian palace, and one day, he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he kills the Egyptian, presumably in anger for beating a Hebrew slave, one of his people. And he buries him in the sand. The next day, he sees two Hebrews fighting. He asks them about it, and basically they say to him, "Who do you think you are?" He realizes that he's been seen. There are witnesses. The Pharaoh finds out. And you can imagine what the Pharaoh said when he heard about the story. "Who do you think you are?" So Moses runs away in fear. He runs away. He's scared. But is he just scared? Don't you think he'd be also in his head, he'd be going, so what am I? Who am I? Am I Egyptian? Am I Hebrew? Who am I? Am I the son of the Pharaoh's daughter? Or am I just an ordinary person? Who am I? I killed somebody in anger. The reason, by the way, why Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. Who am I? And he wanders into the wilderness of sin. Not a wilderness where a lot of sin happens, but a place that's actually called wilderness of capital S sin. He has to cross that and the Red Sea to get to Midian. It's not a short journey. But he does. And you can imagine what's going on in his head the whole time. Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? What am I about? And he finally finds his way to Midian, where he ends up somehow at a well where some women have come to water their sheep. And he defends them from some other shepherds. The result of which is that their father invites him to dinner. He ends up staying. Before you know it, he's married to one of the guy's daughters. He's settled down as a sheep farmer. He's got a family. He's got family. He's got friends. He's got a community that he lives in. He's discovered how to be himself. Then he sees the burning bush. See, just like Jesus, the work doesn't start till he knows who he is. Here's the thing about Jesus, and by the way, Deuteronomy and Leviticus also reminding us to love our neighbor. You can't love your neighbor as yourself until you love yourself. How else would you do that? If you don't love yourself, you cannot love your neighbor. It just makes sense. You need to love yourself, and we're so not good at that for so many reasons. Here's someone, Moses, who doesn't even know who he is. He needs to find out. But he only finds out some of that in the wilderness. See, I think just like, in a way, like the wilderness story of Jesus, he learns how to share his love and his gifts and who he is. And then he goes off into ministry. But it's only as he goes into ministry that he really learns how to use those gifts in the doing of them. Moses, not knowing who he was, wandering through the wilderness, finally came to a place where he found something that he needed to help him. He found community. He found people who accepted him for who he is. Didn't matter if he looked like an Egyptian. Didn't matter what his backstory was. Didn't matter who he was, how he happened to be there. He was still welcomed into the family. He became part of the family, part of the community. He found a home. We need both of those pieces. We need the neighbors and we need ourselves. We need both those pieces. You can't just discover who you are by yourself. You need to be able to share that too. We're community-oriented people. We're people-oriented people. And that's the thing about where we're at now, is it can feel like we're lost because we don't have those connections now. And so it's not just about taking some time to find yourself, or being isolated and having to be comfortable with yourself. It's finding ways to stay connected with the people around us, to create community. That requires us to be accepting. That requires us to be patient. It requires us to not always be quite so quick to judge people. You know, the things that we're not really good at. We need those things to stay connected. Here's a story about someone who goes into the wilderness of not knowing, not understanding, not knowing what's going to happen next, and feeling lost. Who only truly finds themselves when they leave the wilderness. So when we talk about wilderness, and we talk about Jesus intentionally going there and all that he learned there, when we talk about, and in the last couple of weeks we've talked about Adam and Eve and their wilderness experience, and we've talked about Noah and his wilderness experience, and neither of them were at all in a desert. Everyone's experience of wilderness is different. And we see wilderness as meaning different things to us. It's not hard to say sometimes we need that experience in order to discover things, to work on ourselves, to take the time for ourselves. But we also know that sometimes we find ourselves in a wilderness that we didn't choose to be in, that we don't want to be in, a place where we're truly feeling alone and lost. And we need the contact. We need the community. We need to be able to understand there's something beyond the walls. We need to find ways to connect. That's what we're trying to do now. That's what each of us needs to try and do now, is to find new and different ways to connect. We had a really interesting conversation before we started today, because all of the things that you'd think we would have, because we've been live streaming for 3 years now, and you'd think we would have thought of all sorts of things in those 3 years of doing that. But it's not really until you realize that your live stream isn't just the backup to a room full of people or connecting to one or two. It's your only way that you start to think of things. You start to wonder about whether you should test this mic, or say, Robin, you could remember that your mic pack was turned off at the beginning. It's not just little things like that. It's wondering how to connect with people when they're not in the room. It's about talking to the camera. It's about how we use our PowerPoint even. All of those things. Because suddenly, we were in a moment where we didn't know what to do exactly. It's different. This is where we're all at now. It's where Moses was at. And he found a way. He reconnected. And it helped him find who he was. And the next step was to live the life that he was supposed to be living. To be connected with God. To find a way to live the love that is in us and share it with our neighbors. To love our neighbor as we love ourselves. To find a way.